Good morning. Thank you again for allowing me to share with you this morning. I'm going to be sharing a little bit about hope, but more specifically, anticipation. And when I think of anticipation, I can't help it, I think of children. Children are really good at anticipating things. Yesterday, we went to Connor's Farm. Have you guys heard of Connor's Farm? It's so great. There's tons of activities for kids. We go almost every year. And my son was so excited. When we got out of the car, he's 6. When we got out of the car, he was just shaking and jumping and his hands flapping and I'm so excited to be here. Remember when we rode the train? And just so wonderful at holding on to that anticipation. And so when I think about hope and anticipation in my life when I was a child, I think of Christmas. My family always made a big deal out of Christmas. Presents and the tree and food and movies about Santa and about Christmas miracles. It was all a part of what otherwise would have been the darkest and coldest season in New England. And it really didn't matter if they were doing well financially or not. They would find a way to make it special for us and to make it exciting. They would shower us with love one way or the other. Well, there was a Christmas when I was about 10 years old. And, it was coming around Christmas time. We were walking around BJ's. And we passed through the toy section and I saw something that caught my eye. It was a ventriloquist dummy. Oh, I know. It was ugly, I have to say. But for some reason, it just caught my eye. And immediately, as soon as I saw it, I started to dream of what could be. I started imagining myself as the girl with the ventriloquist dummy. I imagined, putting on little shows and mastering being able to talk with my mouth shut and being able to be the person that everyone knew as, hey, isn't that the girl with the ventriloquist dummy? I don't know why, but I showed it to my parents and I said to them, I really love this, Mom and Dad. Well, I knew my parents well enough that I knew that they would take the hint and, Lord willing, it would be under the tree on Christmas morning. I knew that they would get me some smaller gifts, but every year they always got me something big, something that meant a lot to me. And this was it this year. I wanted this ventriloquist dummy. It was the thing I was dreaming of. Did you ever have a gift like that? Something that you had hoped and wished for. There might be no explanation for why it was so special, but it might have been Christmas, it might have been a birthday. I feel like almost everyone has that much anticipated gift. If you can think of one, hopefully you can, but if you can remember when you were a kid and you can think of one, why don't you just take 1 second and share it with your neighbor? What was it? What was that special gift? Do you remember? You know what I love? As you're sharing it, I can see smiles on your faces because I think you remember that feeling of anticipation and of hope. It isn't so much the thing, but it's that hope that you had. Well, at some point before this particular Christmas, my mom took me aside and she said, listen, honey, we went back to the store. They didn't have any more in stock. So I want to make sure that you're not expecting it on Christmas morning. I got to be honest with you guys. It didn't even faze me. I said, oh, she is just doing that to throw me off. I know she got it. I wasn't even upset. My hope was so great. I was so sure that I actually went to the school library and found a book on ventriloquism and started to practice how to talk with my mouth closed. It's nice. It's nice to remember that feeling of longing, that feeling of hoping against hope, that someone you love is willing to make your dream come true. So when we remember it, it makes us smile. And there's that moment, right? That moment right before the gifts are given. And you have that breathless anticipation. I think of my son yesterday as we're on our way to Connor's farm, that anticipation of just, this is it. Why don't we take that feeling, that emotion, and let's hold on to it as we talk today. Don't let it go, okay? Hold on to it in your heart. And we're going to open our Bibles. We just read it. We're going to read it one more time to Luke 2:25-33. And here we're going to meet someone who hasn't lost that feeling of hopeful anticipation. So that's Luke 2:25-33, which we just read. Now there was a man in Jerusalem whose name was Simeon, and this man was righteous and devout, waiting for the consolation of Israel. And the Holy Spirit was upon him, and it had been revealed to him by the Holy Spirit that he would not see death before he had seen the Lord's Christ. And according to the custom of the law, before the Lord's Christ. And he came in the Spirit into the temple. And when the parents brought the child Jesus to do for him according to the custom of the law, he took him up in his arms and blessed God and said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word. For my eyes have seen your salvation, that you have prepared in the presence of all peoples, a light for revelation to the Gentiles and for glory to your people Israel. And his father and mother marveled at what was said about him. Simeon was righteous and devout because he was waiting for the consolation of Israel. God promised a Savior way back here. And Simeon shows up in the Bible way over here. Now, in my Bible, I did a little math just for fun. And between the time when the promise was made and Simeon held Jesus in the temple, let's imagine that each of these pages is 4.5 years minimum, the math that I did. And these are thin pages. These are pretty thin. So thousands and thousands of years before he was born, before Simeon was born even, this hope had been given. And for those of us who have trouble remembering what we had for breakfast in the morning, you can imagine how unlikely it would be that you would believe that this hope given so long ago would be fulfilled in your own generation. I don't think a lot of people were holding their breath at this point. And we know what the promise was. So after mankind decided not to trust God, but seek our own understanding, breaking the one commandment that God gave in the garden, God gave man, woman, and the serpent each consequences. Man was to toil the earth for his food. Woman was to toil in her body for children. And the serpent was to crawl on his belly in the dust. But that was also the day that God gave a promise. He didn't just give consequences. He gave a promise. He said to the serpent, the deceiver, I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring, and he will bruise your head, and you will bruise his heel. In Genesis 3:15. Can we imagine how difficult that moment, that life was for Eve? Watching her husband work so hard, work that soil for food, knowing that there had been a time when they simply picked abundant and various fruits from the garden that were perfectly ripe and perfectly delicious. Could you imagine feeling labor pains, some of the worst pains that exist on the planet, when no one had experienced pain before? And looking down at that child, a small version of her husband, the first baby, telling him about the garden, telling him through tears about their error and all that they had lost, telling him that once in her life she had known what it was like to walk beside God. God had listened, he had taught her, he had loved and rejoiced in her. She was his special creation. What a great, great loss. But he did promise. He said her offspring would bruise the deceiver's head. I wonder if she looked at that child and thought, is this small man the one who could do it? Could this little person one day crush the deceiver and set all things to rights? Surely we have suffered long enough. Surely God will do this for us. But the sad thing is that we know how this story ends. That small child, Cain, would not be the one who crushed the deceiver. As a matter of fact, he himself would be deceived and would fall and would commit sin against his brother. Generation after generation, man after man, none were able to overcome sin and overcome the deceiver. The Bible's not just a compilation of stories, it is one story of God trying to reach out to us, and us desperately desiring God, but ultimately choosing to trust ourselves rather than him for salvation. Adam failed. All of his sons failed. Abraham failed. David failed. The nation of Israel failed. None of them were able to crush the head of the serpent who sought to destroy mankind. Mankind longed for the garden, but was not strong enough against the lies of the deceiver. God repeated his promise to Israel over and over, and Israel longed for a fulfillment of that promise and carried it as a frustrated promise from generation to generation. But here we have Simeon, so long later, actually expecting the consolation of Israel. He believed in it so truly that the Spirit told him, go to the temple, and that's what he did. I think of this beautiful scene. I can relate to it because here we have Mary and Joseph, and they're here to dedicate their child at the temple. And they probably don't have much family around. You know, their family lives up north. So the three of them, small town people, they probably felt kind of overwhelmed in this huge structure that is the temple, with droves of noisy people going from here to there, bumping into them. I can totally relate to how they felt with that 40-day-old in their arms. When my firstborn was firstborn. Sorry, guys. So the first place we went was Target. I know, weird, but we need to get formula. So the first place we went with him was Target. And so we had him in the little stroller. And my husband does something so strange. He covered him with an awning. You know the awning of the stroller? He covered him up. And I was like opening it up like, this poor kid wants to see the light. Leave him alone. And my husband was like, no, leave it. He's so small to be exposed to so many germs. But think about it. This is pre-COVID. He's in a safe little stroller. He's in Target on a weekday. It's dead. So can you imagine how it felt to Mary and Joseph to be exposing their 40-day-old son to this crowd at the temple? And they're just holding him. He's not in a nice, sheltered little stroller. They're just holding him, and it must have felt like unbelievable. Mary and Joseph, their firstborn, promised one of God, right next to all these unwashed people at the temple. I can only imagine the fear they felt when this older, bearded man comes rushing up to them, grabs their child out of their arms. I mean, I would have thought, is he going to take him and run? What's happening? But just to have him bless God, he said, Lord, now you are letting your servant depart in peace according to your word, for my eyes have seen your salvation that you have prepared in the presence of all people, a light of revelation to the Gentiles and for the glory of your people Israel. now that he has said this, they know that he's from God. And they just marveled at what he said. Everyone else in the temple just thought, they're holding an average child who's coming to be dedicated. It's a normal thing. But this man, Simeon, he shared an incredible secret with them. This baby was not just any baby. He was the fulfillment of God's great plan that was given to Adam and Eve. Because of this child, you and I are rescued from our mistakes. Because of this child, every other child who will ever be born have the opportunity to have a relationship with the one who created them. The one who walked in the garden with Adam and Eve can walk beside you and I as we go to work or school or, clean up around the house. The relationship that man had in the garden with God is the relationship that we are allowed to have with him today. So I bet you're wondering, did I ever get the ventriloquist dummy? Well, Christmas morning came. It's kind of like, my husband was like, it's kind of like Ralphie with his Red Ryder BB gun. But yeah, Christmas morning came, and I knew that my parents would save it for last because it was a special gift. And so I was opening, the smaller gifts. Here's the socks. Thanks, Mom. Here's the chapstick. Thanks, Dad. Nothing. But the problem was that the last gift that was under the tree, it wasn't shaped like the box that the ventriloquist dummy was in. I had all these thoughts about, did they move him around to trick me? Like what? I opened it. No dummy. I was trying not to be sad because you're supposed to be grateful on Christmas morning. My mom said to me, okay, now that all the gifts are open, we're going to clean up the wrapping paper and you got to go make your bed. On Christmas morning, I was like, this is double upsetting. So I went to my room, dragging my feet. Oh, I have to go make my bed now. And I look at the bed. There's one more gift. Now, spoiler alert, I never became the girl with the ventriloquist dummy. It was a little string that you used to pull his mouth open, and it was really hard to pull, and I never had really a knack for talking with my mouth shut. As you can see, I talk kind of, move around a lot and everything, so yeah, I didn't learn that Christmas that I would be a future ventriloquist, but here's what I did learn. I learned what it's like to wait and to hope and to anticipate and to believe that someone loves me so much that they would make my dreams, however silly they may be, come true. Do we take Jesus for granted? Do we experience him as the fulfillment of our hopes? My challenge is that as we walk through our week, our ordinary lives, at times we'll be focused on our families, and at other times we'll be focused on our bodies, and at other times we'll be focused on our finances. But I hope that we can take time to not take for granted the truth that is the basis of all of our stories. Instead, put yourself in Simeon's shoes, in Israel's shoes, in Adam and Eve's shoes, and experience the hope, the anticipation, the belief that someone loves you enough to fulfill the deepest longing of your heart. I found that, with life, I think you guys can agree, but you usually have this goal, this thing that you really want, and immediately after you get it, you move on to the next goal, the next thing that you want. But let's remember that the great drive, the great goal and promise of history is that he who conquers all evil has already come. Take a moment to remember Eve dreaming of a return to the garden, a return to an unfettered relationship with God, and rejoice because that moment is here. Our relationship with God has been restored. Now, I was watching this crazy documentary, I love crazy documentaries, about this cult in the 80s. The cult was called the Buddha Field. As with many cults, people were attracted to this charismatic leader. And here's what I think is interesting. The carrot on a stick that the leader offered was that if the followers were pure in their understanding, he could bring them to an ecstatic experience of God. And the narrator, he was making this comment. He said, could you imagine being offered the chance to experience God? And I wanted to shout at the screen, yes, I can imagine. Because we don't need this charismatic leader. We have been given the opportunity, and we don't need to be secluded from the rest of the world and singing mantras. And God, Jesus offers us a personal relationship that can be experienced every day within the extraordinary, but you know what? Within the ordinary. That's the amazing part. Within the mundane parts of our lives. This promise has already been fulfilled and is being offered to anyone and everyone. Are we as excited about that as Simeon the moment he picked up the newborn Jesus? There's one more piece I couldn't forget to mention, the finishing touch. We still live in a world. You know, Jesus inaugurated the kingdom, but it has not yet been fulfilled. There are still tears. There's still brokenness, disease, poverty, and death still hold us back and steal some of the joy that we could be feeling, knowing that Jesus already guaranteed our victory. We experience it so personally in our own lives and in the lives of the people that we love. But God suffers alongside us. He walks us through the pain of waiting. 2,000 years after the promise was fulfilled, we still don't know if we're going to be waiting 2 more years or 2,000 more before he comes and he brings his kingdom in full force. We know God fulfills his promises, and like the promise made originally to Adam and Eve, we know God will, in his timing, complete the work of the kingdom come. But I think that in the same way that we forget to be joyful about the promise that has already been fulfilled, we forget to anticipate the hope that is to come. I do believe that someone loves us enough to make the longing in our heart come true. But I also believe that we will begin to truly live when we have that childlike joy and anticipation that Simeon carried in his chest his entire life. That hope points us to higher heights than our eyes can see, and it also takes away the sting of the times in which we are living. I pray that we will maintain that kingdom perspective all the days of our lives, the bright and sunny ones, but also the ones where everything goes wrong and it feels like the difficulties will never end. I pray that like children, we would believe so strongly in our Father that we would never doubt that he will fulfill his promise, and that we will live again in the unveiled glory of his presence, where his will is done on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.